is up, guys? It is time for the show formerly called MLB Live Before Lock, now be known as the MLB Deeper Dive, because the show's not live before lock. We have to do it a little bit earlier in the day to account for all the other shows that we have going on the channel. So that's the branding you're going to have to look for every single day moving forward. But make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you can see all the MLB content as it comes out throughout the day. But I am Chris Spags, joined by two men on this maiden voyage of the MLB Deeper Dive. We're well equipped to handle those choppy shores of Major League Baseball. First, I'm going to introduce the man who's behind all the things we have on this channel, the man who is behind all the things we have on the website as well. You know him as Awesemo when you see him on tournaments, but in real life, he's Alex Baker. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing good. I think got an interesting slate today with one of the hottest pitchers in baseball right now, Corbin Burnes. So that will be a lot of fun. So looking forward to breaking it down with you guys.
And I got one more man here, the man who behind the scenes is responsible for all of our customer success at Awesemo. That's in his title as a director of customer success. You've also seen him on a bunch of shows for the MLB. He's playing every slate. He knows everything there is to know about Major League Baseball. He's Terry McBride. How are you doing, Terry?
Doing pretty well, buddy. You're revealing our secret identities behind the scenes here, man. We're supposed to be just like these faces that give advice. Doing extra jobs behind the scenes, answering support emails and stuff. Who knew? How you doing?
People should have no fear that I'm doing nothing behind the scenes. So there's nothing at all. Anything I'm touching is right here for you to mock and be mean about or whatever you want to do. Hopefully just hitting the like button and showing some love. But it is an MLB Deeper Dive. We are going to talk about all the key positions, all the key plays on today's slate. But the show, one thing you need to know, we're going to talk a lot about ownership throughout it. And you guys get a special benefit because today MLB ownership is free today on the site. It is a free premium tool for today. We always have some premium tools on the site on any given day. A little preview of what you get behind the paywall if you join Awesemo Plus. So go check out the ownership today. It is free and it'll be updated a bunch here leading into lock for both the Fanduel and Draftkings slates. And also we have a lot going on today because today's a Jock Market show. And Jock Market, if you haven't heard, they've transformed the fantasy sports world into a stock exchange. So forget about waiting until the end of the game to make money. Jock Market allows you to buy and sell shares of players in real time. And that is going to be for real money with guaranteed payouts for all shares at the end of the night. They have daily markets for the NBA, MLB, NHL, and PGA. You can make real money every hour, every minute, every second of any match or game. Use the pregame IPO to pick up shares of your favorite players and buy, sell, or hold during the game based on your analysis. Download the app to get started and use our exclusive Awesemo promo code Awesemo20 for a $20 deposit on your first, or $20 bonus, on your first deposit. It's an exclusive offer only for the Awesemo community, so make sure to take advantage of it today. Use that promo code Awesemo20 on Jock Market, Jock MKT, for a $20 bonus. Awesemo20 is a promo code on there. And I guess let's talk about the overview real fast. Terry, I'll ask you because Alex kind of gave his thoughts. It does look like a little bit of a Corbin Burnes slate. A guy who's been a monster on the year. 40% K rate for him has been, or just about a little bit under that, 39.4%. One of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball so far this year, Terry. And I guess give me your thoughts on him. It'll probably go well with our top pitchers talk as well.
Yeah, he's just been outrageously good, right? By far the best option on the board, I think, today in a good matchup. So I think there's every reason in the world to get to him. It's a little bit difficult to roster him and roster chalky bats and get different with your construction. So it's going to be an interesting exercise on both sides from that standpoint. But I think he just clearly stands above the field in terms of his ability to pick off some strikeouts in this matchup. So just going up against a relatively weak Miami team, they rank, I had it in my column, and I'm just pulling it back up over here. Bear with me just a half a second. In terms of strikeouts in the split, Miami 25.7% strikeout rate this year is 10th worst in baseball. And over a longer sample, they were second worst in baseball. So they have a pretty decent tracker. Excuse me, that I was wrong about the second worst part, but 24.4% strikeout rate, to put a number on it. That is seventh worst in baseball back to the start of 2019 against righties. So significant opportunity for strikeouts for Burnes here. I think he is by far the smash spot, but I do think there are other very playable pitchers with baseball's variance, with the extreme ownership we're going to see on Burnes. I think we can move to other spots, at least in a good amount of shares, just to offset some of that chalk. So I'm not going to be all in on him, but I am going to have a pretty sizable share of Corbin Burnes tonight.
So, Alex, let's talk about Corbin Burnes a little bit through the lens of the top pitchers tool, which, of course, one of those Awesemo Plus features that everybody can get for themselves at awesemo.com/join. But Corbin Burnes on DraftKings today, a 40.5% chance of being the top pitcher. He does have 55% ownership expected to go his way. Top projected pitcher on the slate by a pretty decent margin. And we mentioned some of the numbers, Alex, 39.4% K rate going against the Miami team. He's got 6 guys that strike out above league average in their lineup. And looking at the top pitchers tool, somebody who's using it for the first time maybe might be confused because it does seem like Corbin Burnes looks overowned, but how are you accounting for that? Because he also has the best chance to be a top pitcher by a pretty wide margin, especially on a site like DraftKings where you have the 2 pitchers in. How are you feeling about Burnes? And I guess, how would you approach that where for somebody who's new to the top pitchers tool, just seeing that leverage number, maybe being a bit scared off?
Yeah, definitely. So the numbers here on the top pitchers tool on DraftKings, 56% ownership, a 43% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. And then on Fanduel, with 1 pitcher, it's 35% ownership and 15% chance of being the top scorer. So the thing is, you don't necessarily need the top scorer to win, especially with pitchers, because I mean, if Corbin Burnes gets like 30 and there's a couple other pitchers that get like 31, 32, like you could probably have any of them. So the way I usually look at pitchers, I have Corbin Burnes at an average projection of 28. So that means half the time you're going to get more than that if these numbers that we're using are accurate. And if you're getting more than 28 points, usually that's well more than enough to take down a GPP. So I think it is just an easy decision to lock him in today.
And I guess the other question would be then if he's going to be that highly owned, and it's obviously going to be something, Alex, that changes a lot from slate to slate, but do you feel like there's, and obviously it's hard to put a full number on it to say like, hey, you should be playing 70% of this guy or 30% of this guy. Is there a point for a guy like Burnes that he does get overowned because he's going to be the clear top pitcher on the slate by any metrics you would look at? And I think this has been something we've seen a lot in the MLB slates where there's a clear stud pitcher, some guys that are going to be priced maybe similarly, but don't have the same stuff, don't have the same matchup. At what point does a pitcher get too highly owned for you, Alex, where you'd start to consider looking away? And is Burnes close to that, being that he's going to be about 56% owned?
The reason I usually pivot is not because like I don't like a Burnes, but just because if you go cheap at pitcher, like maybe your lineup looks a lot different and you can gain an advantage that way. But I did find the last slate with Jacob deGrom was pretty comparable, where deGrom was like 60% projected ownership. We had him projected like about the same number of fantasy points as Burnes today. And then like I ended up having him in most of my lineups because it's pretty it's a pretty big drop off from Burnes to the next best guy. So I'm just going to try to make it up in picking stacks better than everyone else.
So what you're saying is that we should pencil Burnes in for that 48 fantasy points DeGrom got the other day because it was a close enough situation, and that's how DFS works, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have him at a 28 projection, but 45 is definitely what I'm expecting.
Terry, how are you handling Burnes today? Because I know you do play a little more on FanDuel, and it does seem like the situation with Burnes going to be a bit different on there because you only have the 1 pitcher. He does come up a little bit less likely as being a top pitcher on FanDuel slates just because you only have 1 pitcher to go to there, and also the scoring, all those things. How are you handling Burnes on FanDuel, and is it a drastically different situation for you, Terry, than it's going to be on DraftKings where Burnes is mostly unavoidable?
Yeah, I think unavoidable is the right word on DK. I do think that at 37% as of my last update in what I'm looking at here in our ownership projections, that is around the range where it's not because he's so heavily owned that I'm going to be or that I don't like him, that I might start considering looking in other directions or at least undercutting the field's mark on that. It's just in general, I don't like to be that heavily onto just 1 pitcher, particularly on a slate like this where there are, like I said, there are a few options that I like that are projecting not to the same degree because of the strikeout potential as Corbin Burnes right here, but similarly enough that I do want to include them in my portfolio and get to them. And some of them are at significant discounts. Like Anthony Schofani is kind of interesting to me, taking on the Rockies in San Francisco. I think that's a really good spot. He only costs $6,800. on the FanDuel slate, he's almost half the price of Corbin Burnes. So while you don't necessarily want to get off the top starter of the day because of the point advantage like Alex was talking about, in these cases where you're getting like 5,000 extra, that's a full top end hitter. That is the difference there. I don't have them projected as a full top end hitter differential if that hitter is having a good day. So if I'm doing like a 2x projection on that hitter, that's not going to be the difference between my Schofani and Corbin Burnes projection here. So I will spread around some of the pitching ownership. And particularly when a guy spikes like that, like I'll usually only want to have a pitcher to 25, 30%, unless it's a short slate with a lack of options, which to me, that DeGrom slate had fewer options on it. So I was heavy on DeGrom as well. And, we all benefited from that. But there are other pitchers that I like, and I want to mix in on this one.
That makes some sense here, and it's going to be a serious talk about a little bit different on DraftKings and FanDuel because you're only picking one pitcher on FanDuel versus the two on DraftKings. But I guess we could talk about sort of the machinations on both sites a little bit more with these two guys. Coming up next on the top pitchers tool, Trevor Rogers, Charlie Morton, two guys that project fairly well today. Also going to be at similar price points on DraftKings to each other, and probably are going to be guys that you're getting as an SP2 and lineups with Burnes as SP1s when you are running the optimizer enough. And Terry, I'll ask you first your thoughts on Rogers and Morton, because you mentioned Schofani as one of these guys that you're intrigued in. Rogers a little higher priced on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. Has Rogers taken a drop down for you at all, just because he's going to be pretty highly owned? Also, the odds of being a top pitcher on FanDuel, not quite as prominent as they are on DraftKings, only an 8.5% chance being top pitcher compared to 16.5% ownership on FanDuel. Is Rogers a guy, Terry, that you're finding yourself getting less to on FanDuel? And I guess, are you feeling the same way about him on FanDuel and DraftKings, or maybe he's just not as much of a priority?
I expect I'll have some of them on FanDuel. I don't know how much that'll end up being. I think based on, the idea of he's going to be probably pitching for the losing team in that game if we're expecting Burnes to just smoke that Miami lineup. So that takes a little bit off the top of his projection for me. 9,600, we're not picking up that same gigantic differential in salary where I know that I can spend that on a ridiculous upgrade in bats, as like I was talking about with Schofani. But he is very much on the board. He projects pretty well for me. 8,400, I'd be a lot more interested on DK. I think you can do some different things with that salary differential. But he's definitely in play. I'm curious to see at the end of the day how much he mixes in for me. But there are other pitchers, like I would prefer, I think, Ohtani in his matchup for 9,100 there. I would prefer Zach Wheeler for 8,300. So Rogers is just at a kind of high price on FanDuel at 96. Not one that takes him off the board for me by any means, but one that definitely will decrease probably my exposure to him. And then who's the other one that you mentioned? Morton?
Charlie Morton.
Yeah, Morton projects well for me. I'm a little concerned about the matchup. The Cubs are also projecting well on the other side of that one. He's got definite strikeout stuff, definite upside for a good strikeout game in that matchup. It's just how the bats on the other side are projecting for me. They hit right-handed pitching pretty well over the last 2 years and change. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. A lot of power coming out of the Cubs lineup in that sample. I wrote it up in my article this afternoon if you guys want to check it out over there. But just to put a number on that real quick, if I can find it, 198 team ISO over the course of that sample. They've hit 254 home runs over the course of that sample. Those are both top 10 in the league. Create runs at 7% better pace against right-handed pitching in that sample. Only strike out 23.4% of the time, which is around league average. So their league average over a bigger sample is compared to what they've done this year, which is kind of struggle for power a little bit against right-handed pitching and strike out a little bit too much against it. So I believe in the bigger sample. I believe in the Cubbies lineup here. I will have some Morton, but I'm more on the other side of it, I think, rostering some sneaky Cubs stacks against what is a fairly popular pitcher on FanDuel.
Alex, how are you feeling about both Rogers and Morton? And Morton, I guess Terry gave some of the reasons why he's not as bullish there. But the stuff that jumps out for me with Morton, he's facing 6 guys who strike out above league average in that matchup against Chicago, and also an aggregate 25% K rate for the projected lineup for the Cubs today. Certainly some power risk, which I think is a good point by Terry. A 190 ISO in this aggregate lineup is what I have them at today. But Morton, to me, I still think projects pretty well. I'd prefer to get to Rogers, but he's more expensive. So I think on DraftKings, Rogers and Morton look like the top plays to get to as that SP2. But do you feel like there's anything wrong or I guess really going for either Morton or Rogers on DraftKings, Alex?
So I think they're both great. Rogers, to be honest, like going into today, like not a guy I've thought a ton about, but his numbers are outstanding. This guy's only like 23 years old, made 7 starts last year with a 30% strikeout rate. in the 7 starts last year, he only averaged less than 20 batters per game, but this year he's been at 22, which in the MLB works out to about 5 innings per game on average. And his strikeout rate this year is 35%, which is insane. He has a swinging strike rate of 19. That's like one of the highest in the league. So he's really been dealing so far this year. And then Milwaukee, they do strike out a decent amount. Vegas is giving Rogers a ton of cred, giving Milwaukee only a 3.7 team total. And it makes sense because some of their better players are out of the lineup today too. So Rogers, I'm feeling really good about. And then Morton, I think, is also a fantastic play. He's got a really good track record. 23% K rate last year wasn't amazing, but this year he's got up to 29%. And the swinging strike rate has increased, so there's reason to believe that will stick. And the matchup versus the Cubs, Spags, as you were saying, they're pretty decent for strikeouts, so I think that Morton makes a lot of sense as well.
All right, and let's talk about a guy that this morning, Greg Ehrenberg, was not I wouldn't say a fan necessarily, but was a believer, much like Terry and Anthony DeSclafani. And DeSclafani is one of these guys that since I've been doing shows for Awesemo over the last few years, I feel like he always escapes me, where there are days where I think he looks absolutely terrible and he gets shelled sometimes. And there are days I think he looks terrible and he gets through a lineup and with much more efficiency than you would think. I guess the numbers for him have come up a little bit so far this year. And I guess it's going to be more of an overarching question, Alex, just in general about sample size and all of that with MLB. But DeSclafani, going back to last season, a 19% K rate, 270 batting average. Going back to 2019, giving up a 184 ISO, a 214 ISO to lefties in particular. DeSclafani to me is a guy that I don't know that I would trust his strikeout numbers being up in the shorter term sample size of the season. But at what point, I guess, Alex, would you be willing to buy in on a guy like DeSclafani making a turnaround here when, if you just go back to last season, it doesn't look that great, but he's in another positive situation for him, I guess. So the San Francisco home park has been a little bit more beneficial to hitters recently. Are you buying in on DeSclafani having a change in his approach here and being able to maintain a pretty lofty ownership, it seems like, no matter what side he's playing on today?
Yeah, DeSclafani, he's never been an amazing strikeout pitcher, but from 2016 to 2019, he was in the 21 to 24% range. Last year had a really off year with only 16% strikeout rate. So what I'm looking at is some of the underlying stats here. His swinging strike rate dropped from 10% to 9.6% in 2020. So, I mean, that's not much. It's surprising his strikeout rate dipped that much. But his numbers are looking back to even better than they were before with the swinging strikes. It looks like maybe his control has declined because his called strike rate is about the same as last year. But there's enough reason to be optimistic that last year was a little bit of a fluke. And the thing you gotta love about DeSclafani today is the matchup where Colorado is so bad they just fired the GM today, or he resigned. And they also strike out a decent amount. So the matchup's pretty much as good as they come. So I do think DeSclafani, he's worth taking a look. Although on DraftKings, he's priced in that same range as Rogers and Morton, and he's not nearly as good. But on FanDuel, he's kind of the bargain play today, and I like him there.
Terry, is that guiding you for the most part here with DeSclafani? Are you more of a believer on FanDuel than DraftKings? I know you mentioned him earlier, and I want to make sure we talk about him because it could be a case where he's different plays on both sites. And the projection on DraftKings, I could certainly see getting to, but I think your case for him on FanDuel does seem I'm on board with that a little bit more. I'm just not a buyer on DeSclafani, I think, on DraftKings today in particular.
So I think he's still a sharp SP2 on DK at 7,900. It's not a great price, but I think it's on the board. I'm definitely much more excited about it on 6,800. For me, like Alex was saying, I am much more into just the matchup here. This season, the Rockies have done pretty well for against righties for power. They've been striking out around league average at a 24.8% clip. They've got a 191 team ISO in the split, which ranks third, and they've hit 21 home runs, which ranks fifth. If we extend that, well, I'm sorry. And on top of that, though, they only create runs at a pace 25% behind league average, even with that power. So if we extend that out, they're third worst in baseball back to the start of 2019 with a 25.2% strikeout rate. Their last creating runs, 20% worse than average. They're fifth worst with 148 home runs and 20th with a 175 team ISO against righties. All of that includes numbers at Coors. So when they're on the road and they're against righties, they're in a terrible spot for their offense. Against both hands on the road just this season, they strike out at a 28.8% clip and they create runs 49% worse than average. The Rockies are a bad offense and they're like on the bad side of their splits. So I think it's a good spot for Schofani. To Alex's point, the called plus swinging strikes are up, but the called strikes are right about the same. But the swinging strikes are up at 11.3 after, like Alex said, they dipped to 9.6. So you like to see that. It looks like, just looking through some StatCast numbers, he lost a little bit of his spin rate on his curveball last year. And it looks like that made a little bit of difference in how his stuff works. It looks like he lost a little bit of spin across everything, really. So he's maybe just snapping the pitches off a little bit worse. And, maybe has found his release point again. There's all kinds of different narratives on what this could be. But looking at the underlying numbers, there are good reasons for why the strikeout rate was down last year that I'm seeing here. So it makes some sense that if he's made those specific changes, these things are coming back. He was also just allowing a ton of hard hit, ton of barrels last season. So we'll see. But as far as he goes in terms of a reclamation this year, but I think the matchup is perfect for this price. I like the park that it's in. I like everything about the spot on FanDuel.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a 3.2 implied run total for Colorado, so it's really hard to go against Schofani any meaningful way today of all days. But just some underlying numbers for me that I've always had some problems with him. I think the lefty splits in particular, going back to 2019, that 5.5 xFIP, 4.5% home run rate allowed. Like, there are some bad numbers that I think Schofani brings to the table, but maybe we don't find out about those bad numbers today in particular. Let's keep going through some of the lower owned, or I guess some of the less probable top pitchers on today's slate. So we do have a few more that have a notable amount of, I guess, ability to get there, maybe some leverage to above the field probability of their chance of being the top pitcher on the slate. And some of the guys, I guess the guy that we really should hit on, who I think is going to be very volatile, that we talked about on the strategy show earlier today with Greg and I, just making sure there are no wrinkles to go with. You can't play this guy at outfielder today to get his pitching numbers. So Shohei Ohtani, somebody I know Terry mentioned earlier on FanDuel being an interesting play. And the numbers for Ohtani, not the biggest sample size so far in major league innings over the last season and change, but a 30% K rate along with a 6.2 xFIP and a 2.4 whip. So he has been walking guys. He's been whiffing guys. It has been all over the place for Shohei Ohtani. And Terry, I'll let you make the case because you brought him up earlier. Ohtani at a price point on FanDuel that's going to be a bit lower on Draftkings as well, and probably about as volatile as you can get. What's the pitch count going to be? I think we have a lot of questions to ask, but Ohtani's certainly showed the ability to get strikeouts, and that's at the end of the day what we're looking for in MLB DFS pitchers. So how are you feeling about Ohtani, and make the case for him?
Stellar strikeout spot against this Texas Rangers lineup. Dead last in baseball so far this year against right-handed pitching with a 30.9% strikeout rate. Back to the start of 2019, dead last in all of baseball with a 26.7% strikeout rate for the active roster. Just every reason in the world to expect a good strikeout game, assuming we get a reasonable amount of pitches out of him. That would be the one concern. He is wonky with injuries. He's always a concern about whether they're going to put him on a pitch count, where that's going to be. He has been walking too many hitters so far this year, but it's only an 8-inning sample, so it's a little bit difficult to say that, in any actuality. But if you're just going by the percentages, that number's way, way up. But I think we have to just kind of take that off the table because, like you said, there's just no sample here. We know that he's an elite caliber pitcher when he is healthy and when he is pitching well. I'm willing to assume that that's the case. 9,100 on FanDuel is probably around the right price for him in a full start, healthy, et cetera, et cetera. 7,700 on DK is a discount. I'm willing to roll him out, even if we find out he's capped at like 90 pitches, let's say, on DK. If we get 90 pitches for him at 7,700, I think that's probably playable over there, given the strikeout upside here. 9,100 on FanDuel as my only pitcher. I'd be a little bit more concerned about it.
Alex, how are you feeling about Ohtani here? Because the projection for his Draftkings projection at least looks pretty solid relative to being a value number on FanDuel. The price point going to make it a little bit tougher to get there perhaps, but definitely some upside. So how are you handling Ohtani given the fact that it is hard to pinpoint his recent sample size, given the fact that he just hasn't pitched enough innings so far?
Yeah, he's been in the 70 to 80 pitch range, so that's been encouraging that he can get to 5 innings, get you the win. And his strikeout rate this year has been 34%, which is outstanding. So I think those are two good factors. And then you put him up against Texas. They're a pretty weak team, but they do play in a batter's park. So I think the pitch count and the park are slight negatives that lead me to prefer Morton and Rogers at this price point. There's something weird going on with this ownership here, so I'm gonna take a look into that because obviously he's a pitcher and a batter, only being counted as a pitcher today. So it looks like there might be a problem with that.
Yeah, so
I think that also actually might have been accounting for in the top stacks tool as well with him as a hitter. I'm not sure if he was in the lineup that you guys used there because they were ranking out pretty well. They rank out well for me in terms of power, the Angels bats, but I was getting them projected lower, and I think we have them as the second highest stack, so we might want to look into that too.
Yeah, the tricky part is because they have fewer batters because the two batter isn't selectable.
Right.
That does mean the team's going to have lower ownership, but it doesn't necessarily mean you want to go there because not having that two batter kind of stinks.
Yeah, especially one of their best hitters on the good side of his split.
So that's a question I would have while we're talking about Ohtani here, because we're going to talk more about the top stacks in the back half of the show after we do some money time, give away the free ownership projections, do the Awesemo Hall of Fame as well. But the Angels, Alex, how are you handling the Angels today? Because they do have a pretty decent chance of being a top stack, but you're missing that number 2 hitter because you can't play Ohtani on the sites that you'd normally be playing him on. And very possible he has good production given the fact that he's had a 243 ISO, 121 WRC plus versus righties. Jordan Lyles gets banged around by anybody he's going against for the most part. Does that decrease the opportunity to you in an Angel stack because it's entirely possible you could miss out on a good chunk of the production they get today?
Definitely. It makes it tougher to get to the Angel stack because it's not only one of their top guys you can't pick, but that means anyone who's stacking the Angels is going to have more overlapped lineups because there's fewer guys to choose from. Although it's not the biggest thing because National League teams only have 8 batters versus 9, that does make a difference. And the fact that it's the second best player on the team, that does kind of take a lot of the appeal away from the stack. I kind of wish they let you pick them as a pitcher or hitter, but I guess it's technically complicated for them.
And Terry, any overarching thoughts for you on I'm saying overarching too much. That's got to get that verbal crutch out of the mix. Any higher level thoughts for you, Terry, on the Angels and how to approach them, given the fact that you cannot pick their 2 hitter, who is one of their better hitters in the lineup?
Oh man, see, now you used higher level and it puts the pressure on me to come up with a good answer. Jeez, I liked overarching. I think it is still an interesting lineup in terms of like I said, they do have one of the better power marks in my home run model. I think it's a great spot against Jordan Lyles in a good park for power. I just am concerned, kind of like Alex was saying, with just the way our stacks come together. But if you wanted to look from Trout down and leave out Fletcher, leave out the top end of the lineup, you could still get a 4-man Trout, Walsh, Upton Pujols that is not bad. It's just those are the 4 hitters that I think everybody who goes to this team is going to be rostering anyway. You're including Mike Trout at approaching 50% ownership on Fanduel, 25 on DK. You're eating a lot of heavy ownership while you're leaving out one of the best hitters there, or you're going to David Fletcher, who's a slap hitter. We talk about him a lot in terms of getting on base in front of all these hitters. But if Fletcher gets on and then Ohtani drives him in, you're kind of wasting that spot. You're only grabbing a handful of points out of Fletcher and not getting the additional uplift from the correlated hitters there. So it's just a hole in the lineup. It's not that I don't like the Angels bats in this matchup, but it's difficult. Maybe they're more useful as one-offs. If you get to Jared Walsh at 13% as a one-off on FanDuel, I don't totally hate that.
Yeah.
About where I'd settle in.
No, I think that makes sense. Certainly with Jordan Lyles, the power that he gives up, it's not crazy just to try to target the home runs that he does. 4.4% home run rate since 2019, 4.8% home run rate over the last season and change, and doesn't miss bats very well. So yeah, it would be nice to be able to stack it logically, but I think trying to get either mini stacks or just get the one-offs would be the approach I would take, just because it wouldn't be shocking if you missed out on Ohtani doing a good job and then just kind of ruining the upside of the stack overall. We're at about the halfway point of the show, so let's just do a little money time here because the ownership's free today anyway. So Alex, I don't know if you want to join in with your brand of money time, but I got a new hat. I don't know if people know this. This is a cream colored money hat that I got just within the last week because we're trying to make our own money hats in the Awesemo shop. And I saw that when talking to our designer, Jake. So now I have 4 money hats and Alex has the cash money hat. So we are covered across the board.
I want to mention too that I was telling Jake, well, maybe we need some money time, other apparel. And I was like, how about a money time flask? Because Nothing pairs better than DFS and drinks.
That is entirely true. And I am known to mix those two, especially when finishing my show load by 1 p.m. or whatever on the West Coast. Lots of time to crack open an IPA and have some, or a flask, I suppose, if I were really having a tough day.
There you go.
On the days where DraftKings lineups lock inadvertently early, those are the days you tap into the flask. Let's do the top owned plays on DraftKings. Top 5 right now. And again, the ownership projections are free today. So you can go there, get them yourself. Normally on the show, when we're doing Money Time, we're giving you something for free. But today it's free for everybody. So go check them out on the site. Top 5 owned plays on DraftKings. Number 1, Corbin Burns, 56%. Talked a lot about him so far. Number 2, Trevor Rogers, 36%. Number 3, Rougned Odor, 29%. This is going to be one we're going to have to hit on in the top stacks. Number 4, Charlie Morton at 29% rounded up. And number 5, Gio Urshela, 27% on DraftKings. Fanduel's top 5. Corbin Burns, number 1 at 36%. Number 2, Mike Trout, 35%. Number 3, Gleyber Torres at 34%. Number 4, Ronald Acuna at 34%. And number 5, Aaron Judge at 34%. And Alex, I'm just going to ask you real fast here, and maybe Terry, you have some thoughts too, but with some of the ownership for the hitters on FanDuel getting very out of control, and one of the worst days on FanDuel, I'm sure for a lot of people out there, the day that Trout was about 50%, ended up with a 0, one of very rare zeros for Mike Trout. How are you handling the hitters getting this high? Because it does feel like the ownership for the hitters in particular getting high at a level that's not usually the case.
Yeah, I think in baseball, like anytime there's a hitter that has high ownership, that's a good enough reason to look elsewhere, because like even if you put the best player against the worst pitcher, like still most of the time they're not going to come through. So that's a huge advantage if you just like avoid some of those guys like Odor. The one exception is like sometimes there are guys that are so cheap that they just let you unlock a completely different lineup construction than you could otherwise. In which case, like it's not quite as big a deal, but also looks like okay, this is DraftKings where Odor is only 3,100. That doesn't like strike me as so low that he should be very high owned. So it's perplexing, and I don't have any problem with just leaving him off my lineups.
Anytime you get a 9-hole hitter at 30% owned, you got to do it. That's one of the DFS principles. Terry, any thoughts for you overall, just generally about the, I guess, the hitter and the chalk ownership on hitters getting to me, a level that maybe seems untenable compared to previous years, but it might just be me kind of going anecdotally off of that.
No, I think it is definitely getting way up there, and it's partly the site's fault, right? DraftKings is pricing up a couple of the high-end premium hitters per team, but leaving everyone else somewhat flat. FanDuel's doing a way worse job, leaving everyone ridiculously cheap so that you can combine hitters in basically any form that you want, regardless of which pitchers you're using, except for the extreme high end. So it's just leaving these spots where like Gleyber Torres is an excellent player in general. I know he's struggled a little bit this year, struggled a little last year, but he's better than a $2,500 hitter, particularly when he's hitting cleanup for the Yankees against Matt Harvey. It's just a ridiculous spot. So the ownership is justified. But then once we start talking about, do we roster those hitters for DFS at that ownership, it becomes a critical question. And the answer is most likely no. Even though they're in a spectacular spot, unless you're able to put them together with a pitcher and with a secondary stack that makes a ton of sense and gets you far afield, which in baseball you can do, or if you're diving in and out of this lineup to, roster Aaron Hicks at 10% helps you get different. So if you're going Hicks and Urshela at 10 and 22, it helps you get a little bit different, but a lot of people who go to this stack are going to be doing that within this stack anyway, thinking that we're all getting different from one another. So it's just very difficult to put these Yankees together in particular with any other stacks and get different enough where you're not going to be duped. And our goal is to be putting in lineups that are not duped and playing some of that leverage. To Alex's point, in baseball, if you do your job right as a hitter 30% of the time, you're on a Hall of Fame track. Well, that means 70% of the time you're putting up a 0 in our lineup. So you can play that game, particularly when we start talking one-offs and starting to use, like, if you're considering Rougned Odor at 30%, hitting 9th as a one-off on DraftKings, that's a mistake. I just don't think it's viable, particularly from that part of the batting order. So I could be wrong. He could come out and hit 2 home runs tonight. Certainly possible. But I think DFS-wise, we're on the right track if we're avoiding him there.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just less at bats for a guy in the 9 hole. It's not even like a guy 3,100 who's not that good hitting leadoff, and Odor is really not that good either. 190 batting average against righties. He's facing Matt Harvey, so that's going to make everybody look better. But still ultimately the ownership projections are really your ownership shares should be reflecting how often you think a guy is going to succeed. And I find it hard to believe that Odor, you could say, yeah, he's going to succeed 30% of the time today. So just one trend to talk about here. I'm sure we'll talk a lot more on these shows coming up. Tyler, let's do the Hall of Fame real fast. Let's get that. I'm not gonna say out of the way. Let's get that in a proper position here to respect and adore all the people out there who've been contributing to at Awesemo HOF handle and sending in their screenshots. We want to make sure we're getting a lot of screenshots in the mix. You can see some new members in the Hall of Fame. I'm actually going to make my screen bigger so I could see these tiny screenshots, but anonymous, I guess would just be the way to call it. So WTread5 on DraftKings, one of the shares of the MMA tournament over the weekend, joined the Awesemo Hall of Fame thanks to the MMA projections, says owes all this to Awesemo himself and the Awesemo site, top fighter tools and projections. He put in 20 lineups and ended up winning that. I think that was a 7-way split in MMA, so good job by Anonymous. Let's go to that next slide where we got let's see, B-Dog 1924 2K NASCAR. A little bit of love for all the sports out there, and you can get into the mix yourself. If you finish in the top 3 in a tournament with 5,000 or more people, I'll go to awesemo.com/avatar, get that Awesemo avatar on there. You can win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum to show off your pride in yourself and then get some free things out of it. That's always a good thing. But NASCAR also in the mix. Got some more Hall of Fame members here from the NBA. TK Washington, $2,500 takedown in the NBA pick and roll on FanDuel. 25 entries, nice score for him. Another one here we got joining the Hall of Fame, Peter Hanley. Be great. He wants us all to be great in that username, winning the NBA shot as well, or finishing well. Lots of good entries there in the NBA shot, but that's another Hall of Fame member. We got King David 187 in baseball here. I'm going to ignore the fact that he's got the code word for homicides in his name and focus on the positives, which is that King David, truly a king on this night, thanks to Brandon Woodruff, Pete Alonso, and the boys. And our last Hall of Fame member is going to be Awesemo himself. Alex, congratulations. I didn't even know we were inducting you into the Hall of Fame. You are in the Hall of Fame with your own name, with your 15K win in the Grand Slam. How does it feel to get that Awesemo colored jacket in your life?
I mean, wow, what a rush. Like, I had no idea that I was going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame here. But, damn. I'm going to take that free Awesemo subscription and use those tools to hopefully parlay it to something bigger.
Yeah, hopefully maybe you can even open up your own site. I don't know, just a thought. But it's great to have a Hall of Fame member. Terry, we have to get in the Hall of Fame. We're just presenters right now. We're not part of the mix. And maybe back in your customer days, you could have been in the Hall of Fame. Now that you're behind the scenes, you got to really set the bar high.
Yeah, I guess I got to go out there. I didn't submit my win from earlier this season, I guess, or maybe we weren't running it in time. So I got to go do it again now. Now I've got a reason to try and win another tournament this year.
That was the only reason now. If ever you want to win a tournament, don't do it for the money. Do it so you can hear me stammer my way through reading some screenshots on a show. We appreciate everybody. Make sure to tweet at Awesemo HOF for all of your victories, whether it be one that's going to qualify for a free month or not. We appreciate seeing all you guys doing well out there. And that's really what it's all about. It's a community of us as hosts, as you guys over there, just trying to do the best you can to make money on all these MLB slates, NBA slates, PGA slates. It is a team effort here, and there's more than enough money to go around for everybody. So that's what it's all about. Let's talk real fast about some of the lower owned pitchers, just because I want to make sure we cover that about as qualified of a fashion as we can. And actually, I'll just throw it to you, Terry, because I feel like there are so many pitchers on the slate. You mentioned going some different directions. We have some guys we haven't hit on at all, like Tyler Mahle, who's been very good, but to me, a little bit overpriced. Zach Wheeler, I don't get the price point on DK at all. Julio Urias has 11 strikeout game last time out. I think you're paying that price tag rather than his actual output. But any thoughts for you? Any pitchers that you really want to bring to the people, Terry, for FanDuel or DraftKings?
Yeah, for me, Wheeler stands out a little bit, at least on the FanDuel slate. I agree. The price is up a little on DK, but at 9,000, he's a playable SP1 if you wanted to go that route. I like the other options that we've talked about better in terms of the strikeout upside and everything that goes into it. But I don't think he's a cross-off at 9,000. But I think he's got a lot of appeal at 8,300 on FanDuel. It's a good matchup against St. Louis. He's at a 26.3% strikeout rate across 23 innings so far this season. He's about a little bit above league average for his career. He's around/above league average. But the Cards active roster so far this year, 26% strikeout rate against righties, 23rd worst in baseball. The 169 ISO in the split has hit 20, and they've hit 23 home runs. So another team that flashes a little bit of power upside, 8th and 3rd respectively. But Wheeler's very good at keeping the ball in the yard in general. His home runs are a little up this year, but home runs are noisy. He's allowed 4 so far this year. But going back over the last couple of years, 0.38 home runs per 9 last year in the small sample, 1.01 home runs per 9 in 2019, and a 0.69 mark across 182 innings in 2018. The 2019 sample was 195 innings. So he's good at keeping the ball in the park. I'm not really worried about the power. I think it's a decent matchup for him here. They could get to him. It could be one of those games where he doesn't strike out too many guys. They put up 4 runs on him and it's a wash. But I think there's some upside, and it could be a little bit sneaky. Only 5.9% ownership as of my last update. So I like him on FanDuel.
Alex, are there any other low-owned or I guess lower probability pitchers that you find appealing, given that we've talked to the guys taking the majority of the opportunity in the top pitchers tool?
Yeah, I think this slate is a great one to just go with some chalky plays, but it always is fun to try to find some guys that no one else is on. So just kind of browsing through the options here. Honestly,
you want to say Matt Harvey, don't you? I could feel it in your bones.
I kind of do. Davey Garcia is kind of intriguing, but the matchup, although Baltimore's not very good, they don't strike out a ton, and I'm worried about the pitch count. So that's someone I like in theory, but tonight I don't think I'm going to have a ton of. And then a couple guys that are kind of popping. Austin Gomber, like his name, that sounds really gross to be picking in fantasy, but he is fully stretched out. His strikeout rate actually isn't bad, 23% over 21 innings this year. And he does pitch in Colorado most of the games. So pitching in San Francisco is a nice park upgrade. So that's someone you could look at. And then the other guy is Sean Manaea. He is going up against Tampa, which is a little bit of a tough matchup, but they'd strike out about average. It looks like he's getting pretty decent ownership, and I do feel like this is one of the weaker spots of this range in salary compared to Rogers and Morton. So that would be a fade for me, even though the ownership is pretty low.
Definitely a slate where the top pitchers are going to stand out by a pretty wide margin, but there are some of the other guys you guys can key in on if you want to get a little bit different at pitcher, even though, your mileage may vary going against Corbin Burns and getting away there. Let's talk about the top stacks now. And guys, smash that like button here. The deeper dive format, we're trying to make sure covers everything as much as we can here for MLB for you guys. So make sure you hit that like button here and give us any feedback too. I'm very happy to hear it. Tweet me at Chris Spags if you have anything you would like to see more of on the show, because we want to make sure to make this as best we can, especially with the overlap of MLB and NBA and a lot of people trying to figure out how to make it both work. So hit that like button. Let me know what you guys are thinking. If there's anything else we could do for you. Top stack. So let's talk about them. And the Yankees going against the aforementioned Matt Harvey, going to be the top stack today. It looks like of the day, both in terms of ownership and their probability of getting to that potential of scoring the most runs on the slate. And Matt Harvey, somebody we've talked about in a lot of shows, a guy who on any slate, you're going to probably pop up for targeting against him. Over the last season and change, giving up a 354 batting average, only a 7% swinging strike rate, only a 17% K rate. Since 2019, a 16% K rate, just really bad numbers across the board, giving up a 248 ISO. And against the Yankees, that can be a lot of danger given all the power they have, the fact that they have every good hitter in the lineup. Yet people want to play Rougned Odor, but he's the only guy here under a 100 WRC plus. And Terry, I'll ask you first. It feels like the Yankees going to be a very appealing stack on paper, but they look significantly overowned, no matter what site people are playing on. So how are you handling them here, given the temptation of just going against Matt Harvey in a good power park?
Yeah, so they were my example that I was using before when we were talking about, trying to figure out the proper leverage and ownership for a stack. That said, they are they have explosive upside today. They're blowing through the top end of my home run model. It's all about the matchup against Matt Harvey. This is the Dark Knight after his back was broken by Bane. So there's every reason to throw Yankees bats at him, other than the fact that we have to figure out how the hell we're going to roster them and not be duplicating, 16 different other lineups in the field. So on DK, you get a little bit of room on like Aaron Judge, just because the price is up at 5,900. So you could build with something like a LeMahieu, Judge, Glaber, Aaron Hicks, and maybe Gary somewhere in there, or Clint Frazier is under-owned at the bottom of that lineup as well. I would completely avoid Rugen and Odor at that ownership. Maybe mix them into a couple if you're building like 30 Yankee stacks. But that ownership for one of the worst hitters in baseball over the last few years is ridiculous at 3,100. I mean, you're not even saving a ridiculous amount of money. 2,200 on Fanduel. He's almost 20% owned. I can just go other directions. I know he's been hitting the ball a little bit with authority since he's come to the Yanks and everything, but it's just not for me at that ownership at the bottom of the lineup. So I'll try and weave in and out. The ownership on Fanduel is just very difficult to do it with, and you're leaving out the best hitters in this lineup if you're trying that game. So it's just tough, but the spot is phenomenal. I mean, this is one of the best spots the Yanks have been in all year. Hitters Park in Baltimore going up against one of the pincushion pitchers in the entire league. So yeah, get me Yankees bats, but I don't know how I'm going to get there.
Alex, how are you handling the Yankees here, given the fact that they do look a pretty over-leveraged? I think, in fact, the most over-leveraged team, according to the top stacks tool. But just you look at the matchup, you look going against Matt Harvey, and the fact that there's a lot of ways you can imagine a ceiling performance coming from this Yankees team. How do you balance all that out, given the fact that they look over-owned, but they're also in clearly the best spot with probably the best hitting team?
Yeah, I mean, Matt Harvey has been a guy we love to pick on every single year. And he pitches in Baltimore, so that's a nice hitter's park, like Terry was commenting on. But so far this year, a 3.4 xFIP for Harvey, so hasn't been playing horrible. His ERA 5 indicates he's been getting a little bit of bad luck on his side. We shouldn't expect a lot from Harvey, but I'm just kind of wondering, like, will he be able to do enough to keep the Yankees from breaking a slate? Baltimore is only in the 60s tonight, the low 60s, so conditions aren't as good as your average night. All of this is kind of leading me to think that you're better off fading the Yankees because they're just collecting too much ownership, and I think it makes sense to just take the field of other teams instead of taking them.
So that's a spicy take here on the deeper dive. So I guess that would be the question then, Alex, because the next top stack team, it looks like, would be the Angels. They're also a bit over leveraged. So are you, I guess, I'm going to assume based on what you're talking about here, are you getting a lot of Houston, let's say, because they look under-owned? Or are you spreading it out more? Because it does seem like if you're not playing the Yankees, going to Houston and Oakland would be the moves you'd want to make on the top stacks tool. But how are you handling that? Because the Yankees clearly going to be well represented. And I'm just wondering what your approach here would be for all the people out there who may be shell-shocked by hearing that you might go under on the Yankees in this spot.
So I think the reason why the Yankees are going to be so popular is you can viably build a lineup with them and Corbin Burns. That looks pretty good. Where if you go to Houston and Atlanta, these teams are priced a lot higher. So it is a lot tougher to spend up at the top end of the range. But we know as contrarian MLB DFS players that if your lineup clicks perfectly, it might be a little too perfect and everyone else will be on it. So I think I'm just going to try to avoid that Yankees and Burns combo and try to only have one or the other in my lineups.
Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I think that's a pretty smart way. Obviously, a shocker that Alex, the top DFS player in the world, has a smart way to approach chalky stacks and chalky pitchers. But how are you handling the Yankees? And I guess, is there anything you're doing similar to that where you could take chalk somewhere, but you're probably not wanting to combine the super highly owned chalk of a guy like Burns and the Yankees?
Yeah, it's that kind of thinking that gets you into the Hall of Fame, I guess. But I'm very much on board with that idea. That's where a lot of their ownership is coming from, because like I said before, the pricing is just broken right now, particularly on FanDuel. 2,500 for Gleyber Torres as a cleanup hitter, for example, is just a broken price. And yeah, everybody's going to be throwing him out there with Burns. Ridiculous upside in that lineup, but that is exactly what everybody's going to be building with. So that's kind of where my Zach Wheeler comes in. That's kind of where my Anthony Schofani comes in. I think you can get, if you build in Schofani, you're offsetting a little bit of ownership. If you build in Wheeler, you're offsetting a lot. You're saving around $3,000 from Corbin Burns. So you've got a decent amount to spend into your other stack now. So now you can build in a second stack that's not one of the extreme value stacks. That's also going to be what else is in that Yankees lineup for everybody else. So anytime you can save a significant enough amount of money to either pay up to a better stack or pay for bats that are like pay up to be contrarian options within an obvious stack, that helps you offset some of that potential to be duplicated. So that's why I like hunting for these lower salaried, less popular pitchers on FanDuel. I think it's an important part of what I do in terms of how you can roster those high-end stacks and those popular stacks while getting away from the field.
So let's go through some of the other top stacks, and I guess let's just try to do like quick, give me a yay or nay, and the logic, I guess, why you're going yay or nay for these guys. So I feel like this may be the most helpful way to approach it on a decent sized slate while we figure out the timing of all this stuff. But Angels, Terry, I'll ask you first. Angels will have a 10% chance of being the top stack on DraftKings. I'm actually going to look at FanDuel at the same time. Going to be a bit over-owned on DraftKings, whereas on FanDuel, they're looking a little bit less ownership than their chance of being the top stack. So give me a yay or nay and what you're thinking about them in an elevator pitch format.
More appealing on FanDuel due to the fact that we have a tiny bit of leverage. I think there's a little bit more value in them on that. Oh no, there's more value on the DK side. So there is appeal in that, but they're over leveraged over there. And we talked about the Ohtani issue, taking him out of the top end of that order, creating a big hole in the middle of that lineup. That concerns me. I'm curious to see if we run future updates where these guys rank. But I think that pushes them down my rankings in general. But like I talked about, they do have very nice home run numbers in my home run model. So I do expect some power. I do expect some upside from that lineup. It's just they're clunky to put together and they're owned at best appropriately.
Alex, how are you feeling about the Angels? A little bit over-owned on DraftKings, a little bit under-owned on FanDuel, but do have the issues that we raised earlier with Ohtani not being able to play a quality hitter in the two-hole.
Yeah, I think the Angels are definitely a team that I feel kind of shaky about because they only have three good batters, basically Trout, Walsh, and Upton, and the ownership on those three guys is way higher than the rest of the team. So the fact that you can't pick that fourth guy, Ohtani, is a big downgrade. And then trying to mix it up with guys like Jose Iglesias and Kirk Suzuki isn't the most appealing thing. Although we'll have to wait and see what the lineup looks like when it comes out. Mike Trout is questionable. So
yeah, on that note, actually, Anthony Rendon was also supposed to come back to the team this week. He's not in the projected lineup on any site that I've checked. But he was coming off the IL for this series, which was what they talked about. So he could be in the lineup, which would give them an improved lineup for sure. He's an excellent hitter.
Yeah, so I think that would be big because just getting one more good bat would help because like everyone's going to have the same Angels stack basically right now. The more good batters there are to pick, the more different your stack's going to be. But based on the fact that their ownership's one of the highest on the slate already, I think we can do better elsewhere.
All right, another top stack today looks like will be Houston, but another team that is going to be a different story no matter what site you were playing on. On FanDuel, it does look like Houston going to be a bit over-owned, actually one of the more over-owned teams relative to the slate. On DraftKings, Houston looks a bit under-owned, and they are going in a pretty good spot against Justice Sheffield, a guy who has done a pretty good job limiting power, only a 2.1% home run rate since 2019, but doesn't blow guys away with strikeout power in any situation. Alex, how are you feeling about Houston as a pivot to the Yankees and the Angels on DraftKings?
I think Houston is solid. On DraftKings, they're definitely low owned. And I feel like if you're going to fade Burns, which I don't necessarily recommend, then you can build a sick lineup of the Houston top guys. But they do look a little bit pricey today. So I'm trying to reconcile those two things. I think it's like a reasonable way to build a lineup is to stack up Houston at low ownership. So I'll have something like that.
Terry, how are you feeling about Houston, where I know you're playing a lot on FanDuel and they are looking like one of the more over-owned teams relative to that site?
Yeah, the ownership concerns me a little bit, but I do like the looks of the lineup. The pricing, again, it's another team. You get Kyle Tucker at 2,800 in this lineup. You get Yordan Alvarez at 3,100. These prices are just broken if anybody at FanDuel is listening, but that's why a lot of people are going to this spot. And it is a very good spot for their lineup. They're excellent against left-handed pitching, 18.3% strikeout rate as a team so far this season with a 125 WRC plus, 25% better creating runs. They're not a big time power team in the split, only 9 home runs so far this year, a 157 team ISO. But going back over time, they are an excellent power option. 210 team ISO against left-handed pitching back to the start of 2019 for the active roster. That puts them third in baseball. So an excellent stack on the right side of their splits, going up against a young starter without a lot of track record, who is not one of these keep the ball on the ground, keep the ball in the yards pitchers that the Mariners do have on the left side. So I think this is a good upside spot for the Astros.
Yeah, the Astros, certainly a team that can get some results today. And want to read a quick chat here from AF6 Retired in the YouTube chat saying, just want to thank you for all the great takes. I got the Awesemo MLB package with Fantasy Cruncher last week. Used to turn $355 into $470 this past Saturday. Good stuff, guys. And we thank you for telling us about that. And we appreciate it. Appreciate the kind words as well. But I know in the Hall of Fame, sometimes we have the big wins on there, but some of those stories from guys like AF6 Retired who've just, entering the dime or entering the quarter jukebox on whatever site you're playing on. Those wins mean just as much to you guys and for us too to hear, because it's all about the process, all about playing at tournaments you can afford, maxing out tournaments you can afford ideally. That's all the strategy here. So shout out to him and shout out to everybody else trying to take that leap and figure out MLB as best they can. Alex, we got about 5 minutes left here. So I'm going to just ask you, what is your preferred stack on the slate relative to all these guys that ones that we haven't talked about? Because there may be one that pops up for you. I mentioned Oakland being a team that does grade out pretty well on DraftKings. I think has some degree of appeal to me. Atlanta, another team that's got a high probability here, though they are mostly appropriately owned. Is there any stack, whether it be one of the top stacks or one of these under-owned ones, that just really stand out meaningfully for you?
I agree with your take on Oakland. They're facing against Rich Hill, and Rich Hill has really had his performance drop over the previous few years in the last two. So his strikeout rate's only 19% this year. We're used to him being around like 30%. So I definitely think that a talented lineup like Oakland can get there tonight, and it looks like the ownership's pretty good on both sides.
Terry, how about you? Is there a stack that you're seeing a good amount of in either your optimization so far, or just your gut feeling on a team that we haven't touched on yet for the hitters?
Yeah, I wrote about him in my article this afternoon, and I want to get to some Cubbies against Charlie Morton on the other side of that one. 12% owned pitcher on Fanduel. I think there's some upside in getting to some bats against him when the Cubbies are going to be this low owned, this affordable on the site. Another team that is just at ridiculous pricing. Ian Happ, 2,500, great bargain there. Wilson Contreras, 36, Anthony Rizzo, 33, Chris Bryant, 38. You can roster those Cubs. I don't love Nico Horner leading off. I liked it better when Ian Happ was leading off, but I'll take Happ in the 5 spot. You get Bote and Hayward and Sogard down at the bottom end of the lineup. It's a little bit weak in the bottom, but I like it through the middle at like no ownership here. There's definite upside against right-handed pitching. Back to the start of 2019, 5th best in baseball with 254 home runs against righties, struck out at just a 23.4% rate, and had a 198 team ISO, created runs 7% better than the average in the split. So it's a good spot for them going up against a somewhat chalky pitcher, one of the higher owned that's not named Corbin Burns.
And I guess one thing we can cover for the stacks, is there a fade for you stack-wise, Terry, that you just see yourself getting a lot less in the field of, it could be a team we talked about, just any sort of fade stack for you?
Looking at it, it might actually be the Astros, just given that I think I will end up on some Yankees bats because I think I have paths toward putting them together with some unique stuff that, some of the things I've mentioned, some other things I'm thinking about that I will not reveal. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it might be the Astros because they're another team that was kind of popping to the top for me, and they're one of the more negatively leveraged on FanDuel that we've got. But I'll have pieces of most of those teams. I typically don't take a team entirely off the board, so it's more of an undercut and get above on somebody like Oakland, who you guys both mentioned, who I also like.
Alex, how about you? Would the Yankees be the team that qualifies here? Just getting under the field on, doesn't have to be a team you're taking out entirely, but I have to assume that is based upon what we've talked about during the show.
Jeez, sir, how do we get your secret sauce here? But anyway, I think the Yankees are probably low on my priority list compared to the field, and then the Angels. We talked about how the fact that Ohtani isn't pickable makes this one really tricky to stack up. It'll depend a little bit on their lineup, but I do feel I don't usually like fade the highest owned stacks, but like today seems like a day where you can find a lot better options outside of those top 2 owned ones.
There you go. So that is the MLB Deeper Dive. I think that's for the next week because I got to go do the tip off in 1 minute. So go check that show out. Make sure to follow at Awesemo DFS. Follow at Digital B21. It's 21, right? Yeah, I thought I had it right off the top of my head, but I wasn't confident. And I got to make sure I plug our guy Terry as best that I can here. Pause on that. Digital B21. Follow him. Follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. Shout out to Jock Market, our sponsor, and tune into the MLB Deeper Dive again, coming to you 5 days a week now. Not a live before lock. It's a deeper dive. We're going to go going deep on everything here for the MLB. We appreciate you guys for watching. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye.
You're doing a full